Memory. After we had spent a half hour with the dolphins, Horan began to row towards the shore of Garentola. As we were drawing closer, Horan looked at me with a mischievous smile. Sir, he said, now the time to go ashore is at hand. Tell me, sir, boy ta ter paisan, do you feel the fear? The fear, I said. What do you mean, Horan? Why should I be afraid? Aren't you with me? Because it's the fear that protects you, sir. It's what keeps you alive. Without it, the danger doubles. So, are you afraid then, Horan? Yes, sir, he said. Look at me. Don't you see the fear on my face? And now that I looked more closely, it was true that I could see something out of the ordinary on his face, an alertness, a gravity, a sharpening of the eyes. The tension was a kind of was of a kind that communicated itself readily. It didn't take long before I could say to Horan truthfully that I was just as afraid as he was. Yes, Horan, I feel it. That's good, sir. That's good. When the boat was some 20 meters from the shore, Horan stopped rowing and put away his oars. Shutting his eyes, he began to mumble and make gestures with his hands. What is he doing? I said to Kusum. Don't you know, sir? She said. He is a bully. He knows the mantras that shut the mouths of the big cats. He knows how to keep them from attacking us. Perhaps in another circumstance I would have laughed, but it was true that I was afraid now. I did not need to feign my fear. I knew Horan could no more shut the mouth of a tiger than he could conjure up a storm, but I was still reassured by his meaningless mumbles, by his lack of bravado. His manner was not that of a magician weaving a spell. He was more like a mechanic, giving a spanner an extra turn in order to leave nothing undone. This reassured me. Now listen to me, sir, said Horan. Since you haven't done this before, I must tell you a rule. What rule, Horan? The rule, sir, is that when we go ashore, you can leave nothing of yourself behind. You cannot spit or urinate. You cannot sit down to relieve yourself. You cannot leave behind your morning's meal. If you do, then harm will come to all of us. Although no one laughed, I was conscious of a mild sense of affront. Why, Horan, I said, I've done my business already. Unless my fear reaches a pitch as to overwhelm me, I will have no need to leave anything of myself behind. That's good, sir. I just thought I'd tell you. Then he started to row again, and when the shore had come closer, he leapt over the side to push the boat. To my astonishment, Fakir followed him almost instantly, even though the water came up to his neck. The boy quickly put his shoulder to the boat and began to push. No one else was surprised by the child's adeptness. His mother turned to me, and I saw she was choking with pride. See, sir, the river is in his veins. What would I not have given to be able to say that this was true also of myself? The river flowed in my veins too, laden with all its guilty burdens. But I had never felt so much an outsider as I did at that moment. Yet I was glad at least that my years in the tide country had taught me how to use my feet in the mud. When it came time to step off the boat, I was able to follow them ashore without difficulty. We headed into the Bardabon, with Horan in the lead, clearing a path for us with his da. Kusum was behind him, with the clay image balanced on her shoulder. I was in the rear, and now for an instant did the thought leave my mind that if a tiger were to fall upon me then, in those dense thickest of mangrove, it would find me all but immobile. a caged feast. But nothing untoward happened. We came to a clearing, and Kusum led the way to the shrine, which was nothing more than a raised platform with bamboo sides and a thatched covering. Here we placed the images of Bon Bibi and Shah Jongali, and then Kusum lit a few sticks of fragrant dub, and Fakir fetched some leaves and flowers and laid them at their feet. So far there was nothing unusual about the ritual except its setting. Otherwise, it was very much like the small household pujas I remember my mother performing in my childhood. But then Horan began to recite a mantra, and to my great surprise, I heard him say, Bismillah, Boliyam ke durnu kalam, Hoida kurlojini tamam alam, Baro mehraban teni bandarapur, Tar chandi kabachache dunya rapur. In Allah's name, I begin to pronounce the word. Of the whole universe, He is the begetter, the Lord. To all His disciples, He is full of mercy. Above the created world, who is there but He? I was amazed. I thought I was going to a Hindu puja. Imagine my astonishment on hearing these Arabic invocations. Yet the rhythm of the recitation was undoubtedly that of a puja. How often as a child had I heard these endless chants rolling on and on in temples as well as in our home. I listened, enthralled, as Horan continued his recitation. The language was not easy to follow. It was a strange variety of Bangla, deeply interpenetrated by Arabic and Persian. The narrative, however, was familiar to me. It was the story of how Duki was left on the shore of an island to be devoured by the tiger demon Dokin Rai, and of his rescue by Bon Bibi and Shah Jongali. At the end, after others had had their prayers, we picked up our things and made our way back across the clearing to the shore. When we were back on the boat heading towards Morijapi, I said, Horan, where did you learn that long recitation? He looked startled. Why, sir? He said. I've known it as long as I can remember. I heard my father reciting it, and I learned from him. So is this legend passed from mouth to mouth and held only in memory? Why, no, sir, he said. There's a book in which it was printed. I even have a copy. He reached down into the part of his boat where he stored his things and pulled out a tattered old pamphlet. Here, he said. Have a look. I opened the first page and saw it bore the title Bon Bibir Karamoti Ortat Bon Bibi Jahuranama, The Miracles of Bon Bibi, or the narrative of her glory. When I tried to open the book, I had another surprise. The pages opened to the right as in Arabic, not to the left, as in Bangla. Yet the prosody was that of much of Bangla folklore. The legend was recounted in the verse form called Diwapadi Poyar, with rhymed couplets in which each line is of roughly 12 syllables, each with a break or a sasera toward the middle. The book was written by a Muslim whose name was given simply as Abdurrahim. By the usual literary standards, the work did not have great literary merit. Although the lines rhymed in a kind of doggerel fashion, they did not appear to be verse. They flowed into each other, being broken only by slashes and asterisks. In other words, they looked like prose and read like verse, a strange hybrid. I thought at first, and then it occurred to me, that no, this was something remarkable and wonderful, prose that had mounted the ladder of meter in order to ascend above the prosaic. When was this book written? I asked Horan. Do you know? Oh, it's old, said Horan. Very, very old. Very, very old? But on the first page was a couplet that read, There are those who travel with an atlas in hand, while others used carriages to wander the land. It struck me that this legend had perhaps taken shape in the late 19th or early 20th century, just as the new waves of settlers were moving into the Tide country. And was it possible that this accounted for the way it was formed, from elements of legend and scripture, from near and far, Bangla and Arabic? How could it be otherwise? For this I have seen confirmed many times that the mud banks of the Tide country are shaped not only by rivers of silt, but also by rivers of language: Bengali, English, Arabic, Hindi, Arkanese, and who knows what else. Flowing into one another, they create a proliferation of small worlds that hang suspended in the flow. And so it dawned on me that Tide Country's faith is something like one of its great Mahonas, a meeting not just of many rivers, but a roundabout people can use to pass in many directions, from country to country and even between faiths and religions. I was so taken with this idea that I began to copy some passages of the pamphlet into the back of a notebook I was carrying in my jola. This very one, as it happens. The print was tiny and I had to squint hard to the page to decipher it. Absent-mindedly, I handed the book to Fokir. As I might have to one of my pupils, I said, "Read it aloud so I can copy it." He began to speak the words out loud while I wrote them down. Suddenly a thought struck me and I said to Kusum, "But you told me Fakir can neither read or write." "That's right, sir," she said. "He can't." "Then?" She smiled and patted him on the head. "It's all inside here. I've told it to him so often that these words have become a part of him." It is evening now, and Kusum has given me a candle so I can go on writing. Horan is impatient to leave. He has been entrusted with the task of taking Fokir to safety. Only Kusum and I will remain. We can hear the patrol boats which have encircled the island. Horan will use the cover of darkness to slip past. He wants to go now. I say to him, just a few more hours. There is a whole night ahead. Kusum joins her voice to mine. She leads him outside. "Come, let's go down to your boat. Let's leave Sarah alone." Intermediaries. By the time Pia had organized her notes, washed her clothes, and claimed her equipment, the day was over and night had fallen. She decided to turn in without waiting for dinner. There was no telling how long it would be before she slept in a proper bed again. She might as well make the most of this one and get a good night's sleep. She decided not to interrupt Kanai, who was upstairs in the study. She mixed a tumbler of Ovaltine for herself and took it downstairs into the open. The moon was up, and in the silvery light, Pia spotted Nilima standing outside her door. She appeared to be deep in thought, but her head turned as Pia approached. Pia sketched a wave with her free hand. "Hello." Nilima answered with a smile and a few words of Bengali. This drew a rueful response from Pia. "I'm sorry," she said, shaking her head. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "Of course," said Nilima. "I'm the one who should apologize. I always forget. It's your appearance that gets me mixed up. I keep having to remind myself not to speak to you in Bangla." Pia smiled. "My mother used to say that day would come when I'd regret not knowing the language. And I guess she was right." "But tell me, my dear," Nilima said, just as a matter of interest, "why is it your parents never taught you any Bangla?" "My mother tried a little," said Pia, "but I was not an eager student, and as for my father, I think he had some doubts." "Doubts? About teaching you his language?" "Yes," said Pia. "It's a complicated story. You see, my father's parents were Bengali who'd settled in Burma. They came to India as refugees during the Second World War. Having moved around a lot, my father has all these theories about immigrants and refugees. He believes that Indians, Bengalis in particular, don't travel well because their eyes are always turned backwards towards home. When we moved to America, he decided he wasn't going to make that mistake. He was going to try to fit in. So he always spoke to you in English? Yes, said Pia. And it was a real sacrifice for him because he doesn't speak English very well, even to this day. He's an engineer and he tends to sound a bit like an instruction manual. So what did he speak with your mother? They spoke Bengali to each other, said Pia with a laugh. But that was when they were speaking, of course. When they weren't, I was their sole means of communication, and I always made them translate their messages into English, or else I wouldn't carry them. Nilima made no response, and her silence led Pia to wonder whether she had taken offense at something she had said. But just then Nilima reached for the hem of her sari and brought it to her face. Pia saw that her eyes had filled with tears. I'm sorry, Pia said quickly. Did I say something wrong? No, my dear, said Nilima. You said nothing wrong. I was just thinking of you as a little girl, carrying your parents' words from one to the other. It's a terrible thing, my dear, when a husband and wife can't speak to each other. But your parents were lucky. At least they had you to run between them. Imagine if they had no... She let the sentence die unfinished and fell silent again. Pia knew she had unwittingly touched on some private grief, and she waited quietly while Nilima composed herself. Only once there was ever a child in our home, Nilima said, presently. That was when Kanai came to stay with us as a boy. To my husband, it meant more than I could have ever imagined. More than anything else, he longed to have someone to whom he could pass on his words. For years afterwards, he would say to me, I wish Kanai could come again. I remind him that Kanai wasn't a boy anymore. He was a grown man. But that didn't stop my husband. He wrote Kanai many times, asking him to come home. And Kanai never came? No, said Nilima. She sighed. Kanai was on the way to success, and that takes its own toll. He didn't have time for anyone but himself. Not his parents, and certainly not us. Has he always been like that? Pia said, so driven. Some would say selfish, said Nilima. Kanai's problem is that he's always been too clever for his own good. Things have come very easily to him, so he doesn't know what the world is like for most people. Pia could see that this judgment was both shrewd and accurate, but she knew it was not her place to concur. I haven't known him long enough to have an opinion, she said politely. No, I don't suppose you have, said Nilima. Just a word of warning, my dear. Fond as I am of my nephew, I feel I should tell you that he's one of those men who like to think of himself as being irresistible to the other sex. Unfortunately, the world doesn't lack for women who are foolish enough to confirm such a man's opinion of himself, and Kanai seems always to be looking for them. I don't know how you describe that kind of man nowadays, my dear, but in my time we used to call them fast. She paused, raising her eyebrows. Do you get my meaning? I sure do. Nilima nodded and blew her nose into the hem of her sari. Anyway, I mustn't be rattling on like this. You have a long day ahead tomorrow, don't you? Yes, said Pia. We're starting early. I'm really looking forward to it. Nilima put an arm around her shoulders and gave her a hug. Do be careful, my dear. It's dangerous in the forest. And not just because of the animals.